Welcome to the Economy Magazine. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares with economic and financial news. Coming up, EasyJet arrives in Israel, and Moldova deals with rotten apples. First, the headlines. European stocks were flat on Tuesday as Hong Kong's rally slowed and as investors waited for important guidance from the U.S. economy. European indices opened in the red, hovering near 15-year highs as investors awaited U.S. retail sales data for a clue on Federal Reserve policy. A recent slate of soft U.S. data has contributed to the market, pushing back the timing for a highly anticipated rate hike. The U.S. Treasury Department on Monday reported a budget deficit of $53 billion in March, up 43% from the same period last year. British consumer price inflation held steady at a record low 0% in March, boosting households' disposable income before the May election. The Office for National Statistics said consumer prices rose 0.2%, but were unchanged compared with a year earlier. Inflation has not been this weak since at least 1989, when comparable data began, and is well below the Bank of England's 2% target. The sharp fall in inflation has been driven by the slump in oil and food prices. Britons are likely to welcome the figures following years of prices outstripping meager growth in wages. Economic growth is likely to slow in sub-Saharan Africa in 2015, following a drop in the price of oil and commodities, World Bank representatives said. African growth is set to slump to between 4.4 and 4.7% when excluding South Africa, which has slightly lower growth than the average. Since 2008, Africa has continued to grow, underpinned by Chinese demand for basic raw materials. But a slowdown in the Chinese market and a drop in the price of commodities has weighed on African exports.
Average growth of 4.4% still remains, keeping Africa among regions which continue to have relatively high growth rates. But because the rate of population growth in Africa is very high, we need at least 6 or 7% growth to really see lots of African countries emerge.
Greece denied that it is preparing for debt default, as reported by the Financial Times on Monday. Sources quoted by the financial paper said, if no deal is struck, Athens would withhold IMF payments worth 2.5 billion euros due in May and June. The government needs to reach common ground with its creditors before a crucial meeting of the Eurogroup on the 24th of April. A Greek default would, in the short run, halt emergency liquidity assistance and lead to the closure of Greek banks, capital controls, and wider economic instability. But for now, Athens is trying to find cash to pay 2.4 billion euros in pensions and civil service salaries due this month. Finland's telecom giant Nokia is in advanced talks to buy French rival Alcatel-Lucent to create a new global networking giant. A Nokia-Alcatel merger would reshape the telecommunications equipment business by creating a company with more than 100,000 employees. The new company would boast a combined 2014 revenue of $27.4 billion, eclipsing Ericsson's $26.5 billion and Huawei's $24.9 billion revenue. Though the companies made clear the deal could still fall apart, Alcatel-Lucent's shares jumped up 13% following the announcement. After years of increasing airline costs, passengers are finally getting a break with the arrival of EasyJet. And in Israel as well, French travelers and lovers will be able to fly to Le Gay Paris at a significantly lower cost if they book early enough. More from ITV News reporter Shelby Weiner.
Just after 4 p.m., the first passengers arrive at the check-in desk at the Israeli Ben Gurion Airport. They deposit their luggage, and a few hours later, they arrive in France. Monday, March 30th, EasyJet inaugurated its first flight from Tel Aviv to Paris. For the occasion, the low-budget airline has planned a small ceremony. On the menu, champagne with a background of French music.
Well, we like EasyJet and we're happy that the line opened because it's cheaper than other companies.
Vacationers and businessmen alike are excited, and the businessmen represent almost 1/4 of EasyJet customers. A one-way ticket is fixed to less than 50 euros, but in reality, very few travelers benefit from such a tariff.
We paid, my wife and I, and the baby. We paid 850 euros.
Because there are only a set amount of tickets at the lowest cost, prices will gradually rise depending on the demand.
The system is so easy. The later you book, the higher the price. So the earlier you book, the better the price. It's very simple, but it's a system that adapts to the demand for each flight in question.
At 7 o'clock, boarding begins. The passengers take their seats in the plane with 30 minutes left to take off. 5 hours later and a little flight turbulence, we are here at Charles de Gaulle Airport. The pilot, who has worked for the company for 11 years, seems satisfied with the first flight from Tel Aviv to Paris.
On board, it went very well. Even if the service is relatively difficult for our workers, but the flight went very well. I think the advantage of low-cost airlines is that they are the future of aviation. It allows us to have a stable job and be relatively well paid.
But on the passenger side, a different story resonates with some of the customers. For many, the quality of service is not at the level they are accustomed to.
Comfort is not enough for all the services. Boarding, the disembarkation is extremely far with stairs in the bus compared to destinations such as Paris, Geneva, which I am used to going on the 5 a.m. flight.
The quality has not prevented EasyJet to be a part of the European leaders. In 2014, the company has carried over 65 million passengers and hopes to excel because of this new link between Tel Aviv and Paris. For now, 3 round trips are offered each week, a number expected to rise to 5 by the end of next year.
And now for a look at some of the hottest Israeli innovations with Channel 2 correspondent Noah Aron in our Innovation Corner. Ms. Aron.
Hi.
Thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
So I understand the first thing you're coming with is something related to Homeland Security.
Yeah, so we have a very interesting 2 rounds of investment today in Israeli startups. And I want to start from an investment by the former Prime Minister of Israel, Ehud Barak. And he invested $1 million in reporting Homeland Security. And what they do is interesting. They basically make the communication between us, the citizens, and official bodies, just such as the police, for example. They make it easier for us. Usually when you would call 911, it would take
we can actually see Barak now for those who've forgotten what he looks like. But so essentially when you call 911 for American users, it basically helps the communication, right?
Exactly. I mean, so it would take more time. I mean, if you call 911, usually they would ask you where exactly you are and what exactly is going on. So what reporting allows you to do is they allow you to upload videos and voice messages and recordings to the system that shows the police, for example, and you can see it right now, the police or the ministry, exactly where you're all located and what is going on. So during an emergency, this can be crucial. And it makes,
of course.
Yeah. So
bringing 911 essentially into the 21st century.
Yeah.
That's what it's doing,
It took us too long. Right? And this is actually their seed round. It's $1 million. It's very important for this company. We'll see what will happen next with them and where are we going to see the system next. Another interesting investment today is by the Chinese internet giant Baidu. They're investing for the second time, by the way, in an Israeli startup. Okay. And they're investing in Tonara. This investment is of $5 million with Carmel Ventures. What Tonara does is they create digital sheet music platform for musicians and for music teachers. Yes, and it's very comfortable. It can actually follow you while you're playing and see exactly where you are.
It listens to what you're doing and it follows you.
Yeah, it can listen.
Why is Baidu, why is a Chinese company interested in this?
So you know what? It's very interesting. By the way, it's a Series B round. So right now the company, is more, it's established. And what's interesting about the Chinese is, did you know that about 40 million Chinese kids are playing or learning how to play the piano? And in China, this is considered a status symbol.
A status symbol for the middle class.
Yes, exactly. Sure. So I guess this might be the reason. And in general, this is the second time that they're investing in an Israeli startup. So we're probably going to see that happening more often in the next few months. The last investment was in December, so it's very close. Yeah. And I want to move on to a completely different subject. Do you text while you drive?
I try not to, and I definitely will not admit to it here on the camera.
Yeah, no one will admit that. And there are many projects and many, we've seen a lot of commercials trying to convince us to stop texting while we're driving and stop looking at our phone. But a lot of people are still doing that. And right now, there's another Israeli project trying to prevent that. They're called Rego. This company originally started by trying to build products for the blind. These 3 Israeli founders started by doing that. And then they kind of came up with a new idea to make that a product for everybody. So what they do, they have a little controller that sits right on your wheel, and it connects to an app in your phone. And the app recognizes when you're driving, and it could tell you, I mean, once it recognizes that, it can read out loud your messages, your emails, your WhatsApp messages, and tell you.
It sounds absolutely
exciting
for those people like myself who are in a situation where they have to communicate, but you can't do it while you're driving.
You can just record a voice message.
Yeah. Nora from Channel 2, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Moving now to Moldova, where tens of thousands of apples lie rotting in the fields following a Russian embargo on fruit exports from the ex-Soviet state. The unanticipated action apparently came in retaliation for Moldova's gradual shift towards the European Union.
It's a worrying time for Moldovan apple grower Konstantin Fukalita. Almost all of his produce used to be exported to Russia. But in July, Moscow imposed a ban on fruit exports from Moldova in apparent retaliation for the former Soviet nation's closer ties with the European Union.
From one day to the next, we found ourselves with the harvest in the fields, but under embargo. We had to find new markets, make new connections. It took time and had a huge impact on prices.
Konstantin's income last year barely covered his costs. Overall, Russia's move has caused an estimated $145 million of losses for Moldova, the poorest country in Europe, which still largely relies on agriculture. The disaster has been compounded by the local currency losing around 30% of its value since November. Farmers took to the street by the thousands, demanding an increase in their subsidies.
Apple producers have been left disorientated. They don't know what to do. The European market is difficult to crack. And there is the problem that the majority of the apple varieties planted are for a Russian market and aren't known in Europe.
Moldova has a fair trade agreement with the EU that entered into force in September, in theory opening the door to a new market. But it's a slow process, and out of an annual production of 400,000 tonnes of apples, barely 1% has gone to the EU, or more precisely, Romania. Moldovan authorities say the agreement is designed to end their reliance on the unstable Russian market.
It will have a positive effect in the medium and long term on agriculture and the Moldovan economy, as we have learned to invest more in the quality of our products.
The country will also benefit from EU financial aid to the tune of €64 million for agricultural development. Farmers hope the industry, like their crops, is set for growth.
And now for some other news, perhaps more exciting news from the world press in Media Watch. And we're joined by Daniel Roth.
How's it going?
Good. Thank you for joining us.
You didn't think Moldovan apples were particularly exciting?
No, I think it's very exciting and very sad. But yes. You certainly have more interesting stuff, I think, from America.
Another sad story. Yes. Eric Harris, who was killed in Tulsa when tackled by police. Well, by mostly police, actually. One of the cops was a deputy, a volunteer deputy, who's actually a 73-year-old very wealthy insurance broker, and he has donated enormous amounts to the police in Tulsa.
I was going to say, where is this an economic story? But I see what you're saying.
This is it. He's paid to play cop, and he's not the only. It's not. There's over 150 volunteer cops who are deputized there.
It's a noble thing, certainly, until you, I guess, start killing random.
Right. It sounds good. It sounds, on one hand, good.
Yeah.
You're volunteering for the police, helping out. But the reality is, here's a guy who
took it a little too seriously.
Who mistook a taser for a gun and killed someone. He's been charged with manslaughter now. Right. But the question at hand here, the economic question that we're looking at, is how was this person allowed to essentially pay for the right to hold a gun and a taser and everything else he was holding, and he paid for the opportunity to go out into the field, and he had actually served 1 year as a cop in the mid-1960s. But this really calls to question the kind of culture we're talking about, where people are paying to be able to...
As long as you have the money and you can pay for it, you can do whatever you want and live out your fantasies,
basically,
right?
And this is more and more we're seeing on the political level with donations. On this particular case, we're seeing these cases in the U.S. primarily where people are able to pay to do all kinds of things that you maybe shouldn't be able to do.
Okay, well, Daniel Roth, you should be able to do this. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you.
That is the end of The Economy Magazine, your daily source for economic and financial news at i24 News. I'm Benjamin Chong Alfares. Thanks for joining us, and do join us again tomorrow.